What is up, you guys? Today we are working on a 2019 YZ450F, and there's going to be a few videos going on with this bike. It was pretty hammered. We started working on it, tore it down. Right now we're getting ready to do a new piston and shim the valves if it needs it, but we'll check that once we get inside of it. So as you can see, I've already started a little bit. It's pretty simple stuff. You don't need to take the suspension and stuff off, obviously, but you're going to need to take your plastics off your seat, and then your fuel tank, which is easy. On these Yamahas, it's just got a rubber grommet down here that pops in right here and mounts, and then your seat on top of it. So it's pretty simple. You can leave everything connected to the fuel tank. You can just flip it around like that and throw a strap on it, and it will hold itself up. And other than that, we're looking at the top of our engine. So we want to get inside there, and we're going to check the clearance of the valves and just see what's going on at first and see how they are before we even tear into the rest of the motor, because I want to know how it was running. It was still running pretty good, but it's got about 50 hours on a stock motor that's been rode pretty hard, so we're going to see what it looks like. Okay guys, we're going to start this little project nice and simple. Popping the spark plug wire out of the way. Oh, let's get this thing out of here. This is the first time this bike's ever been pulled apart, so we're going to see what we got going on in here. Looks pretty dirty, even a little bit of dirt down inside there, so we're going to clean this up as we get into it here. And get the mud away from the hole there. So we're going to pull that spark plug out. We don't want gunk dropping down in there. Gonna get that cleared out of the way. Next, we're gonna take all these Allen wrenches out. Right here, looks like that we got 3 of them going on that holds the valve cover on, and a hose. Okay, so we'll pop this off real quick, and I'll get back to you at the other end. All right, guys. So we've got the valve cover off. As you can see here, I did end up taking the 4 screws out, the 4.8mm here that held up the ECU and stuff, and I ended up tucking it out of the way. It just took a couple minutes, but it made it way easier to get the valve cover out nice and clean without dumping anything down inside there. So now we can check the valves, but we got to put it at top dead center first. We can't get too carried away with this yet. We are going to pull these couple plugs here and get the motor at top dead center first before we proceed. And I will show you how to do that. Alright guys, next part's pretty simple. Right now we're going to start by removing these plugs. This one here is a 14mm. Just gonna pop it out nice and gentle like. Then we're gonna take our 6mm here, and we're gonna back this plug out. Be gentle with these guys, keep them clean. Alright, here comes the fun part. Alright guys, so now that we're inside of these covers, we have a 17mm right here, and this is what's going to turn the engine over. And there is one thing I forgot to tell you. I pulled the spark plug, which is like a 5/8. It makes the engine way easier to turn over, obviously, because it can't make compression. So what we're going to do is we're going to put our socket on this bolt, and if you look inside here, which it's going to be hard to see on camera, let me see if I can get it to focus. See that tiny little mark inside there? on the screen, it's just a little black dot in the center. But that's the mark you're looking for, and that's telling you you're right up and down. And now is where you really need to pay attention, because you're gonna see on here that there's little dots. See it right there in the top left corner of the screen? There's also one on this right camshaft. Right there. And now when those are spread apart from each other, this is really important, guys. It is on the ignition stroke of top dead center, because you have two top dead centers on a 4-stroke. You have one on the exhaust stroke and one on the ignition. So every 2 turns. But you want to be on the ignition's top dead center to check this. And as you can see, I've already got my engine at TDC, top dead center of the ignition stroke. So this is where we want our engine for us to take our measurements. Alright, so next thing we're going to want to do is see what, sorry about this, we're going to want to see what the clearance is on a cold engine. Obviously you don't want to work on a hot engine, because 1, that's stupid, you'd burn yourself. 2, the tolerances would be tighter because the metal changes. Long story short, make sure your engine's cold. Come up and look at these numbers. So you can see our intake is going to be between 0.10 and 0.17 millimeters. Our exhaust is going to be between 0.15 and 0.22 millimeters. So what we're going to do is get our feeler gauge, and we're going to hop in there and find out what we're working with. Okay, so we got our feeler gauges out, and we got a 0.004 through a 0.007, which if you look at the top, valve clearance intake, we're looking at the inches, that's as close as we're going to get. So let's see what we got. Alright guys, if you look here, we're looking at the front of the bike. Our front cam is our intake, our rear is our exhaust. Now, we just looked up how to see in the service manual how to check our cold valve clearances, and it's kind of hard to see on my camera here, but right underneath there you're gonna see some valves, and that's right where we're gonna stick our feeler gauge, and we're gonna just measure okay. That one's too tight, and that's a 6.006, and that's the very max of our tolerance, so we already know we're under that now. Let's check our exhaust real quick. And hopefully you guys can see that very well. Okay, so you see how that was sliding nice and tight, but it was still able to get through? That's a good measurement, so we're going to take it for that one. Now, we're going to go over to the workbench, and we're going to put a little drawing of this on there so we can write down our clearances and check them against the manufacturer's recommendations. Alright guys, as you can see, I took my Expo and drew on my workbench here. Right here we got the actual cam gears drawn to scale. Just kidding. I'm a good artist, like Bob Ross. Just happy little valves here. Okay, so we got our numbers wrote down, and I just laid it out. You got your cam gears, you got 4 valves, 2 of each, intake and exhaust. I wrote them down. I wrote down my measurements I took with my feeler gauge on each one, And right here I have my threshold, so I'm going to compare. Let's start with the exhaust. So my first one was at 0.007. So I can be basically between 0.006 and 0.008. That one's perfect. We're going to take it. 0.006. And that was a perfect fit. So if we're at 0.0059, we're good and tight on the exhaust. Intake 0.005, 0.004 through 0.0067. Rockin'. 0.004. Again, that was a nice fit at 0.004, which means we're right at the tight tolerance of our intake. So it actually looks like the valve clearances are solid on this engine. Let's keep tearing into it and see what the piston's going to look like. I reckon it'll probably be in pretty decent shape considering. Alright, now moving on to the piston replacement. We've got the valve cover off, we checked our clearances, everything's good there. So next what I did was removed the airbox screws and took off the whole airbox cover that was up here. It's all nasty, so we're going to clean all this up. Throttle body's all gross, so we're going to clean that up real nice. And then we're going to proceed to tear all that down. Move all this stuff out of the way. We're going to take the engine mounts off the other side and get ready to pull the head out of this thing. I'm going to put something over the valve train of this as well while I do the work. I don't want to leave it exposed like this because the bike's still, even though it was washed, is still pretty dirty. And we don't want to risk getting anything down in the engine. That's going to bite us in the butt later. Next thing I'm going to remove is the throttle body, which is the same Allen wrench that you just used to take off the airbox cover. You're going to loosen that bottom clamp, pop it up, and disconnect all the electrical plugins, and just set them to the side over there for now. Let's get this off, and we're going to clean this up a little bit and set it to the side. Alright guys, 12 millimeter, 14 millimeter. Let's just get these out of here. We're going to take this engine mount off. And I'm not going to sit here and painfully make you guys watch me take this hanger off. Well, maybe the hanger, but not the rest of it. I'll walk you guys through it, but I'm not going to get into too drastic a detail because if you're this far into it, you're either in it for the long haul or you know what you're doing. I'm going to assume you know what you're doing because most people wouldn't even attempt this unless they've been into an engine before. But if you haven't, good for you. You can still figure this out with the help of your owner's manual, in all honesty. I mean, it's pretty simple once you do it. It's just doing it the first time, you know. Hopefully I can help you guys through that. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me below in the comments. I'll do my best, and I can also include stuff in the next video or something. This definitely isn't something that I rarely do. We have a lot of bikes, so I do a lot of work. Let's keep going and take this exhaust off in the back here and around the front so we can pop this head off. take your piston. This is my old one. My rings. Check it out. This is your manual. It's telling you which order to put these in. Okay, letters up on your rings. It's going to go thick, thick, thin, oil ring, thin. And if you look, letter up. Okay, you're going to put oil on all these parts as you install them, because you don't want to dry start it when you go to crank it over for the first time. You're going to make sure the dot on your piston is facing the back of the engine, which would be your exhaust side. And you're going to lubricate all of this. And when you put it in, you're going to snap these clips in. And as you insert the head onto the piston, just prior to that, you're going to want to make sure your rings are facing the proper direction based off the center of the piston. I'm going to hold this here so you guys can see it for a second. So your top ring is going to be facing the top left. Second one's going to be opposite. Third one opposite. It's going to kind of go crisscross. So pause the video if you need to, just make sure your rings are lined up, because this is what it takes to seal. Okay, so as you can see, I've got the new piston installed, and I put some oil on it and assembled the lower part of the head. As you can see, I've kept the timing chain pulled up through the entire time. You do not want to let that drop into the crankcase. So make sure you always got something through it. A piece of wire works good too. I don't know why I'm using a screwdriver. But anyway, so I got the lower head back on it with the new piston in it and the new rings all lined up like we talked about. I got my dowel pins inserted and a new head gasket. So now it's time to put the top part of the cylinder head on that holds the valve train. Alright, you guys, you got the cylinder head set back on. You're ready to start putting your camshafts in and torque down your head. So start by putting all of your head bolts in. 14 millimeter. There's 2 down there and 2 inside the head. Bop and bop. You torque those down to 30 foot-pounds, crisscross pattern. Be nice and gentle so it goes down smooth. Once you get the cylinder head torqued on to the lower piece, those 4 main bolts, you can get your timing chain in your cam set. So this part's really important. Remember how we set it for top dead center earlier? Let's see if I can get a light in there for you to see one more time. Right inside that little hole. You can just barely see it on the camera. There's a notch and it lines up perfectly with the case right above it. So now we need to come up to our camshafts, and if you look on the intake, we have 2 dots. For this top dead center, we want the second dot. So you're going to have your first cam dot level with the case right here, and the second dot will be pointed to the sky up here. Your second camshaft only has 1 dot, and it's going to be lined up with the case on the exact opposite side of the engine. So this would be your exhaust side. You see what's going on here? So we're perfectly lined up with the arrows right here. We're at the second dot lined up with the case, this dot lined up with the case, and we have our timing chain set. on it. So the next thing we're going to do is torque down these caps on top of the cams. Alright guys, next piece, timing chain tensioner. So now that you got your marks perfectly lined up in this hole, you've got your second dot level with the case, dot level with the case. This piece right here, under this bolt, there's a little skinny flathead screw in there, and you're going to stick a screwdriver in there and wind it all the way up to the right, and it's going to pull the plunger in inside of this. You're going to hold that while you stick this on the engine with a new gasket, and then use your other hand to finger tight these in, and then you're going to tighten them like 7.5 foot-pounds, and then you're going to slowly release the screwdriver. Then make sure you can wiggle it back and forth, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But just make sure it's set nice, and then you put this bolt back on to cover the hole. And it doesn't have to be tight either, because it's not really holding anything on per se. So now that you have that on, you'll look up here and she's tight. So the engine's timed and put back together. Everything's torqued down properly, and I'm going to start getting these little things buttoned up, and I'll show you when I put the valve cover on and what all I got going on. But yeah, it's just putting it back together now. We're on the downhill slope. Next up, we're going to do the valve cover gasket, get put on our bike. So this is going to be a new piece. We want to make sure that we get a new gasket for this. And for this project, we're also going to need some YamaLube or YamaBond for Motorsport gasket adhesive. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. We're going to put it in 3 spots. There, 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 and stick it on the valve cover, and then we are going to take the valve cover and place it on top of the engine. And there we go. Got the valve cover on with the new gasket. Torque the 3 valve cover bolts down to 7.6 foot-pounds of torque. Put my new spark plug in there. And that's it. As far as the motor goes, I mean, we still got to assemble the rest of the bike, but the engine's put back together and ready to run. So we'll do a start on it here in a little bit. I'm not going to finish it tonight. It's getting pretty late, but now that I got the engine sealed up, it's a good time.